See that? See what's behind me? That's the engine in its nice cozy home. This is how I got there. So I've got my steering shaft here. I'm going to do a few modifications. I got one of these flange bearings here to mount to the firewall. Help stabilize it and just help seal it up. The factory mount is just a little rubber grommet. It's got a pretty big hole. So this will slide in there, keep it nice and tight, and then also act as another support for the steering shaft. I guess it's kind of a two-piece shaft. It's a fixed U-joint, but it's a two-piece shaft in there. So in order to get the flange bearing off, I'm actually going to have to cut it, slide the bearing on, and then weld a sleeve over top. So I guess I'll get that done at this point as well. So the hole in the firewall from the factory grommet's a little big for this bearing. So I'm gonna get some plate steel and just weld kind of a filler piece in there, so it's a little bit smaller. So the steering shaft bearing is in, the flange bearing, which pretty much concludes all of the work to the front end before we gotta fit the motor and put the new motor mounts, try and build the new motor mounts. Before I put the motor in, the only thing I'm left to do is I'm just gonna take some RTV and maybe go over some of the seams and some of the welds that have separated a little bit over time, just to try and get as much of a fireproof seal as possible on that firewall. And then it's onward and upward from there. Well, I got the wrong oil pan gasket in the mail. I am too impatient to wait for the right one to show up. So I guess I'm just going to use some gasket maker, put it on that way. So my next step is to start building the motor mounts. I'm basically going to build a new plate that'll mount to the side of the engine, one on either side, come down with a pipe that will attach to a point on the chassis. It's going to be tricky. The mounting bosses on this block are at two different heights. This one here actually goes down further, so I'm going to have to build a piece that's kind of offset and then kind of make my pipe mitered to fit that. So that'll be a little bit more work than I originally planned on.
So there's one engine mount, one side done. I'll worry about finish the shaping of it once we get the tubes welded to it. So this one's going to be quite a bit trickier than the other side. Not only are these on kind of different elevations as they were on the other side, but they're kind of weaseled around the starter and the oil filter and the fuel pump. So I want to be able to find somewhere that I can mount a piece of pipe on there to attach to the chassis, but at the same point still allow myself room to pull that starter out of there if need be. There you go. The engine is kind of in place. Everything worked out. The oil pan fits nicely in between the cross member and my little kind of subframe bar there. Still needs to be centered, and height-wise, it's just resting on the bell housing right now. But it'll work. It'll fit right in there, right in the factory location, just like it's supposed to. So my next step is to figure out the motor mounts, which I'm looking on this side, which would be the driver's side, is going to be extremely tricky. I think I might end up just looking at a way to reuse the factory mount after all. But we'll see what happens. Alright, so the engine's located. I got it sitting on a block of wood and a pipe. It's sitting flat. It's sitting center of the engine bay, right where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to leave it here. There's no weight on the engine hoist right now, and try and mock up some engine mounts. So I got my bushings here. I used some leftover control arm bushings I had. When I bought the control arm bushings for the front, it was a whole kit for a Fiero, so I got a bunch of rear control arm bushings that I don't need and that don't work on the car. So I just happen to have a piece of tubing that they fit in really nice. So I got those rigged up. Those are going to go in between these little angles here and bolt through and sandwich together. So in order to drill my hole through and make sure they matched, I just put a tack on either side. Then I can run my hole through and they're going to be exactly the same on both sides. So here are the two mounts that'll mount to the chassis. Just little angle iron brackets with the bushing drilled through it. So I'm going to leave it kind of assembled like this to tack it to the chassis.
Alright, motor mounts are done, they're welded up, they're painted, and then covered in dirty handprints. Anyways, I'm gonna stick these on the motor, and that will complete the fabrication to the front end of the car, which will be a big step going forward. Alright, that wraps it up. The front end is done. Motor's in, motor mounts, new cross member, reassembled, strengthened. To be honest, it probably added a measurable amount of weight to the front end. At this point, I'm not worried about what the car rolls in on the scales anymore. Used to be. Even with all this and the weight that I hope to add to the back to kind of balance it out just a little bit better, I'll probably only still be rolling over the scales around 1,800 pounds at the end of a race, so that's pretty good for our class. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. This engine, my original plan was to build it on my own with the weird concoction of parts and whatnot. Scotty was working with Roger at Custom Automotive with their sprint car. Worked out a bit of a deal, and I ended up taking the motor over to them. Now I took it over there in pieces. It was a bare block, a couple Tupperware containers of engine parts in the back of my Volkswagen Golf. You want a tip? You want to make friends with engine builders? Don't do that. At least use a pickup or something respectable. No, really. I brought it over there with all these harebrained ideas saying, hey, I've heard guys have done this, I've heard guys have done that. I really had no idea how to do it. Roger took the time to source out the parts, he sourced out the rods, he did the work to make the rods work with the crankshaft, balance the bottom end, ordered the pistons custom to the combustion chamber size, as well as what he could bore it over to and what we could do to maximize the pump gas rule. He did all of that stuff, right down to finding the ARP hardware for this thing. Like every other part in this thing, we had to source it out. So there's main studs from one car, there's head studs from another car, there's rod bolts. Everything was sourced together, pieced together, and made to work by Roger. The cylinder head was done by Chevy at CCR Motorsports. Same thing. He took time away from doing 600-700 horsepower street engines, 600-700 horsepower sprint car engines, and worked on a 40-year-old cylinder head for a Chevette. I can't speak enough to how grateful I am to those guys. The amount of time they took. Anytime I was at Roger's shop, he's dynoing 700 horsepower late model motors. He's installing 1,000 horsepower mud bog engines. He's putting together 800 horsepower sprint car engines, and he took the time to build me a fast, reliable Chevette mini stock engine. So I really can't express how much I appreciate the work those guys did for that. Anyways, we're going to move on to the back of the car. I'm going to clean up the shop a little bit because I can't find my lower radiator hose, and it's a disaster area. And so we'll start tearing the back end apart next time around and have some fun. It's actually 9:30 on Valentine's Day night, believe it or not. Happy Valentine's Day to my wife, Michelle. I love you. And I expressed that by working in the shop on my race car. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.